Yeah?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Hey, this is Brad.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. I really like to go swimming around your head. I like a download, like a USB plug into your back of your head and download it to my computer. I don't know if you'd let me do it.
Yeah, what are you wanting to know? I might can help you.
Well, I'd like to just kind of get to know you. I mean, you worked in all that for. Tell me about what you did. Just start there. With
Okay. I started to work. I was raised here in Bastrop and down here at Beekman, and then I went to Bastrop School. But then after school, I spent a little time in Texas. But I come back and I went to work at Crossett. Worked in the plywood mill for about 6 weeks and then went into woods. I worked on the Crossett block with James Gilbert was my boss for about a year, and then went in the military and then came right back to that Crossett block. And then I went to work for the U.S. Forest Service down at the Experimental Station, and I spent 31 years there. So all of my the Crossett block was from the state line to Crossett to 82, and then over to the railroad tracks that goes up to not Whitlow, I don't know what, anyhow, it goes up to, and turns and goes to the mill, and I can't remember what, Rolfe Junction, where it turns, and that was all the Crossett block up to there. That's where I worked when I worked with GP. Of course, with Crossett Experimental Station, I worked everywhere,
Yeah.
But
now, when you first started, before you went to the military, you first started working with Crossett block. After, I guess it's probably what you said. About what year? What year are we talking about? Whenever you first started getting exposed to
it? 69. Graduated in 69. Be 70. I went to work in 70, and then by 71, I went in the military in April 71, so I was in there 2 years, and then I came back and went and worked for the Crossett block for about 8. I worked for about 8 years counting my military, so about 6 years there on the Crossett block.
Did you go to Vietnam?
No. Of course, that's where I was headed, but when I went to Fort Polk, and then I went to El Paso, and they trained me on a Gatling gun, I call it. It's a Vulcan is what it was. That's anti-aircraft, and they was using them in Vietnam, and that's where my orders was. But when I went to can't remember where it was up north to get ready to go to Nam, they held us there. And we didn't know it. They didn't tell us nothing. You know how they do, but they didn't tell us nothing. But I stayed there in Fort Dix, I guess it is. Anyhow, we stayed there for like 19 days, and they, every time they'd call you out, they finally just put us all into one barracks and said, just sweat it out. Well, we all thought we was going to Nam. We didn't know what was going on, but they told us, they just separated us, and then they finally came in there one morning and said, okay, here's the deal. The reason y'all have been here so long was Geneva Convention. They have finally ruled on this gun, and y'all can't go to, all of y'all not going to Vietnam. There's only maybe 5 or 6 of you going to Nam. And that gun had they call it a towed version, a little trailer, and they used the trailer on airports, and 2 or 3 airports over there that the U.S. had, that they had these for supply to protect them, and that's the only ones that went over there. and I think there was like 4 guys out of it was about 60 there by the time they did this. And
Wow.
all the rest of us went to Germany. And I don't know, I don't have many different companies, but the company I went to, they were there was nobody over there really that was a gunner. You know what? That's what we was all trained. They had tank drivers and mechanics and stuff like that. They didn't have nothing. But anyhow, that filled the void in Germany, and
Yeah.
so that's where I spent my time in Germany, and come back over here. So.
Okay, I got it. Well, that's a unique experience, and I'm going to tell you, it's a very lucky experience too. I'd rather be in Germany than Vietnam at that point in time, probably. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But now the CrossFit block. See, there's all these terminology that I'm not as familiar with, and So, but now it's, I'm just beginning to get a glimmer of it. I mean, I my mind has been somewhere totally else besides forestry until the past few months or so. And, I've been, tangentially involved in it. We've had trees planted on some of our properties, and I've learned about some of this stuff, but I never put it into one kind of a conversation and thought of it as something that started somewhere and is somewhere else now. So I never really thought of it like that. But then I started looking at this stuff, man, and it just broke down. Like you said, there's roads everywhere, there's lines, there's blocks, there's townships, and all this legal stuff. But then, men on top of it have built another little culture on top of it of, what they call it. They got other names for places. So there's just all kinds of, family places, and so I'm trying to get my bearing on things and make sure I understand what's technical and what's, family, people's names, and you know what I'm saying. Trying to say, Mike. I'm just trying to understand what's going on with all this stuff, and it's immensely interesting to me. That such research was going on down there at that facility back in those earlier days, sure. But what was your impression of whenever you got there? I guess you said, let's see, you really. God somebody's trying to blow me up there. When you got there, what was the impression? What was it like whenever you got to that
Experimental station?
Yeah,
experimental station? Oh,
yeah.
Well, I was used to working for GP, and of course we spotted timber for the paper mill and the plywood mill. So it was production, Well, when I went to work for the government, it was experimental. They don't get in no hurry, So
Yeah.
I had to learn how to slow down.
Yeah.
And they did everything to the 10th, or the 100th, and we didn't with GP. We just, like when we spotting logs, we would spot about every 10th tree. We'd get an estimate on the size of it and how many logs is in it, and that's it, and they could figure out how much volume they had in a certain 40-acre block, because we did it by 40-acre blocks, and they would know how much that we had spotted. GP, that's what we did with GP, but when I went to experimental station, we did some of that, but it was different. Every tree, we measured every tree on the whole, the whole 40 acres, every tree. Then we went back and figured the volume. Then they figured how much the growth was been on it, and they take the growth off. That's all they did. They took the growth off, and we go back out there to spot it. So every time you spotted the tree, you call it out, and somebody had a running tally. And every time and of course we're supposed to take the bigger trees, because we was doing uneven age management. So I had a hard time with that, trying to get my mind set on uneven age management instead of what GP did with even age management, basically. So, but but I finally got it figured out. So it didn't take near as many of those big trees to get the cut that you're supposed to have. The good 40 and the poor 40 was the first that I worked with. So they tried to.
Yes, okay, yeah, I've heard of that. Those two names I've heard of. That what was that other one you said? The North Block. What when you started off saying, what was the name of it? North Block or something like that?
Well, the Crossett Block. You probably.
The Crossett Block.
Yeah, that's the Crossett District. The GP Crossett District is what that was. That's where I worked. See, they had districts. They got one right down here. Do you know Cleve Sullivan? Not Sullivan. Can't think of his last name. I had to work with him. But when you leave Crossett and come toward Bastrop on the Crossett Road, do you know where that old Crossett the buildings was?
Yeah, I went down there the other day, and I say that the forestry group's there now, Arkansas Forestry, I think, aren't they?
Oh no, that's the experimental station. Okay, if you go back toward town and you get up there that curve, see those roads. That was a Maxwell road to me. All of that's Ashley County's put numbers on them, and I never did learn those numbers.
I got.
But Cleve Summerlin lives right there in that curve. There used to be 2 forestry houses there, and a couple of sheds where we kept the tractors and stuff. That's where I went to work at every morning when I worked with GP.
Yeah.
And then they had one here just south of a community grocery store here in Louisiana. That was Tensall, and then it was Crossett right above us. Then there was Yale out there off of Hancock Road. You know where, let's see what the name of that church is out there. Can't think of the name of that. I can't.
Well, if you're talking about what I'm thinking about, there was one in Fountain Hill as well, wasn't it?
Oh yes. There's a bunch of them. They was all up and down the Berlin Road. Let's see, there's three on the Berlin Road, 1 in Louisiana, and then 2 in Arkansas, south of Hamburg. The East Block, the Berlin Block, and then the Bryant. And then there was Breer, Longview, and I don't remember all of them up north of here. I know there was several of them up there, but I didn't. Only reason I'd go up there would be a big fire or something that we'd have to go to, and I don't remember going. I went to Yale Block several times, went to East Block several times, but I never went on up. Now, one time I was called almost to Pine Bluff, but we didn't get there. But they turned us around before we got up there, so I don't even know where that was. That fire was. So,
but, did you recognize that name, Trogger, Mr. Trogger?
I have. I've recognized a lot of those names.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but some of them I knew and some of them I didn't. So.
Yeah.
And some of them I heard about, And so,
yeah.
But it's like Petersbug. You're talking about Petersburg. You're the one that's talking about Petersbug, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you go down Petersburg Trail, there was an oil well test site out there. I don't know whether it's still there or not, but the last time I was on that road, there was an oil well there. And that's what everybody told me. That's where Petersbug was. When you cross, you go down Petersbug Road and you cross Sulphur Springs Road, and it turned into just a little pig trail basically, but it turns and comes back north and comes out on the Kramer Trail over there, and back. The last time I was down that road, you couldn't go through it all the way. You had to turn around down there at that oil well site and come back out to the Sulphur Springs Road, which was years ago. I'm talking about 35 years ago, 40 years ago. So, I don't know whether that road's there or not now. So.
Well, if I were to go anywhere back in there, I'd probably have to go backpacking, which is what I've been doing. I just get me a backpack, a stick, and I just kind of run back there and kind of look at particular things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now I went to that area that it's behind doors, but I still go to it. I probably get in trouble. I don't know, but it's like I'm just there. But it's that little Burl Anthony. Isn't it Burl Anthony Fort thing down there?
Yeah, they got a Burl Anthony in there. Yeah, that's south of there. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
well, I don't know where the boundary is on Burl Anthony. Tell you the truth,
I got
but it's right in that area, you know. And Sulphur Springs, that creek that runs right on out and crosses the railroad tram over there and runs into Stink Creek, you know.
Mm.
And now, when I first went to work at Crossett Block, there was a tailor that worked with, he was what they called a technician. I was just I guess a woodsman they called us. You know, but he was higher up than I was. He'd been there a long time. His daddy worked in the woods, so they knew a lot of those people in that South Arkansas all the way to the river area. And he's the one that showed me where Petersbug was, and Sulphur Springs, and where the Indian Mound was. There's an Indian Mound right behind the log house there at Sulphur Springs. And then there's one across the creek, the High Mound, across the creek on the north side, which is in Feltonsaw now. So I don't guess you can go to it anymore. I don't know. I've been to it a couple of times, but.
Is that what they call the High Mountain Ridge? Is that what you're talking about there? It's over
Yeah, some people call it a ridge, but it's really just an Indian Mound is all it is. It's a ridge. You can see it on Google Maps. You could tell that it's got pine trees on it. And,
yes.
You know.
Yes.
But that's the only ridge in there that's got pines on it. And,
yeah, it's green. I would love. That's where I want to go right there because I went to all those Poverty Point places, but a lot of those places like that, they just were, they just would move that dirt in there, like and live on it mostly. But so, is that how big would you think that quote unquote mound ridge is? I mean, how would you characterize it? Like in terms of like a footfield or smaller or bigger? Or?
The only time I went around the whole ridge was one time, and it was after dark.
I get you.
We had some fires over there. We had one up there close to Carter's Camp. I don't know if you know where that area is. It's just right there on that loop, we called it, the loop road. I put that fire out, and the state was on another fire on down there, but the backwater was up.
Yeah.
And the plane was flying, and when I got loaded back up, they told me to go down to the tram. So I went down to the tram. Well, you can't turn one of those big trucks around on that tram. You can turn around there at the tram. But anyhow, my boss, James Gilbert, the plane said the mound was on fire, but it's water all the way around it. And this was like 5 o'clock in the evening, and he said, we're going in there and plow around that fire. And I said, if there's water around it, why are we going to plow around it? We're going to plow around it. So I'd never been in there, and I told him, I'm not going to try it because I don't even know this territory enough to drive a tractor in backwater.
Yeah.
And get in there. He said, well, you follow me in. So he took all of his stuff out of his pockets, and I'm glad I went to the truck and got my compass, but I followed him, and we went in there, and that water came in of course it was a John Deere 350 crawler is what it was. Water came in the seat with me.
Mm.
That's how deep it was in several places. When we got to the mound, I plowed all the way around it, right at the water's edge. So I'm gonna say it's quarter of a mile long, maybe.
A lot
East
of dirt.
east and west, maybe. And maybe 200 yards wide. It looks like a normal ridge to me. Now, some people say the Indians made it. I don't know, but it looked like. The other time I was in there, I was painting landlines, and I walked around on it some, but I didn't go up and down it. We kind of looked around. Some people had been digging in it and stuff like that, but it just looked like a pine ridge to me. I don't know whether.
So let me ask you this. Now, up there at that Macedonian cemetery, you know where it's at?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so there are quote-unquote mounds there, and people have dug in those as well. Are those mounds, or is there another phenomenon around here that's moundish that people confuse with mounds?
Well,
that's my question. That's probably.
I couldn't remember when you said Macedonian Cemetery. I couldn't remember that. Now, what we always called that was two cemeteries there. The one on the south side was the Black Cemetery, and the one on the north side was the Switzer Cemetery. Now, that's the way we called them. Now, sometimes we'd say the North Cemetery, sometimes we'd say South Cemetery. I never heard the Macedonian thing, but just past that, where the on the Kramer Trail there, just past that cemetery, best I remember, maybe 100 yards, there was a house down there. I don't know if it's still there now or not. It was Blacks, though. And they were on the north side of that Kramer Trail. That was the last house before you go on into the swamp down there.
Hold on. Kramer Trail, is that the road that's there before you turn off to go to Macedonian or whatever you want, north and south there? Is that well, let me ask you this. Highway 11 or Street 11 through there, is that the same thing?
Well, I don't know what they call that. Now, I hadn't been in that area now in a long time. If they put another road in or something, it's going to throw you a curve when I tell you this. But when you come out from Petersbug Road and hit the Blacktop or hit the Sulphur Springs Road, I don't remember what that state highway number is no more, but
169. Yeah.
Okay. You turn north and you go up maybe a half a mile maybe, I don't know. Then it's a gravel road to your left. That's what I call the Kramer Trail. I don't know what it's called now, but that goes right straight on into the Carter camp over there it came out on the Loop Road, which is, it actually crossed the Steep Creek. I don't think it.
That's it. Does it go down there to that big pond down there? If that road that I'm thinking about, it cuts off from 169 and it drives down. It's a kind of a curve there, and that goes off down to Macedonia. And then if you just follow that on down about a mile down there, it come to this big creek or big pond that I think is Crossett's Waste Pond.
Yeah, that road. Now, that's Ramshire Road.
Yes. Okay. I got you. Okay, that's the only one that I've been to.
Okay, you know where now. The city dump used to be out there. I don't know whether it's still there or not. I think they done. I don't know. I don't have no idea. But where you turn off of the Ramshire Road at to go to the cemetery?
Yes.
Okay. When you got right at the cemetery, they used to have a pipe there.
Okay.
That they kept closed all the time. And that was after we cleaned that up. And I don't remember which one of those Switzers died, but one of those Switzers died. and we helped clean that cemetery up in that area right there where they were going to bury them at.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started really cleaning the cemetery up. But that old road that actual dead end road's on, it went across that cemetery, on down through the woods a little ways, and then it hit the black cemetery. And now, some of the old timers always said those two cemeteries touch each other. There's people buried all the way through on that road. I don't know. We never could find those, but there's a space in between there. We couldn't find any graves, but I don't know whether these graves are or not. When we spot timber in there, we'd be real careful. We'd leave a big area right in that area, So.
See, I don't even know. I didn't know there was another cemetery there. The only point I know, it has that F.A. Switzer, and has some Johnsons over there. But now I don't know. Now there's a road there that I would say goes west that's cleared out from there at the very back of it. But it did look to me like there was something that goes south through there, like there was a trail through there, but it has like 10, 12-year-old pines growing on it.
That's probably what I'm talking about. I'd have to go down there and look, and like I say, it's been years, but that old road went right on through, and it come all the way out to the next gravel road, which is what I call the Kramer Trail.
Okay.
And it used to be a power line down that Kramer Trail that went to that one house. That's the only house that was down there. But that road went on across the Kramer Trail went on across the Stink Creek. I don't know whether GP done away with all their bridges. They got in some lawsuits with bridges, so they done away with all their bridges. So you could go in there, you could go in right there at Walsh Nest Deer Camp. I don't know if you know where that's at, but right there, let's say right there on the north end of that cemetery road where you're talking about, going into the Switzer Cemetery, you can take that Ramshire Road, and you could go across the pond. You went below the levee, crossed a couple of creeks. It's a couple of little old bridges. The first one I think was concrete, best I remember the last time I went down it. But a couple of them, and then we crossed the big one, which was Stink Creek, and then went on out. You could go all the way on out to 82. But you can't do that no more. Yeah, I know. No. So I don't think you could go down the Kramer Trail. You might could. I don't think they built no bridge on it.
I went down that Ramsor Road. I went down it all the way because I didn't see any signs. Okay, but I went down it just looking. I went down it far enough until I saw a great big paw track on the road that I know was a damn cat. A big cat. Mm-hmm. So I got my ass out of there in a hurry. You hear me? You didn't have to tell me to get out. I got out on my own. I knew what that was. But now see, I can expect it, and those Felsenthal people may be the key to it. They may be able to help me get to where I need to get to. They may be able to help me get to some of those places. What do you think? You think they'd help me? They could help me get to that place if from a media perspective, or what do you think?
You talking about? You talking about getting to Petersbug?
Well, I probably need that's GP land or Weyerhaeuser land now, isn't it? Well, who owns that?
I would think all of that was Weyerhaeuser now. I would think so. They was a little bit of private in there, but not a lot. But it was mostly Weyerhaeuser or GP then. And of course it went through all them hands, but it's all Weyerhaeuser now. So now GP still owns all of that, as far as I know, up and down that Stink Creek.
Mm-hmm.
They own all of that land. They actually, by law, they can't. If they sell it, they're going to be in the middle of lawsuits. So they had to hold that, under GP.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, that right there is Well, of course, they got a legacy. They got many, many years that the current owners and the previous owners didn't have. There's been paper mills here for a long time, so almost 100
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And no telling what all is out
Yeah, see, they used to just have the Crossett runoff and everything went into Stink Creek, and then uh, they they had to go in there and completely change everything up. The city dump, the city runoff, it all goes in a different ditch, and I don't know where they allow it to go back into the Stink Creek ditch, but it's out that way somewhere. I don't know. That was after my time with GP, but I knew it was going on, but
there. Mm-hmm.
I wasn't in the know, I didn't keep up with it, so.
It seems like that if you're going to keep up with that, you'd have to be involved in it daily for most of the time of it, because it seems like they're always changing and shit. If you just look at it, I mean, I remember where they have, Robinson in there, and they'd have another group in there, and they'd be doing work out there and changing it. So, I could understand that. But now, I want to go back to the spotting thing. That's interesting to me. So what you talked about taking the biggest trees, and then whenever you went down there, they were looking at something a little bit more stringent, like measuring everything. Were they looking for other things as well? I mean,
Yeah. When we spotted for Georgia Pacific, see, it's still called. I'm going to give you some forestry terms that you might not get because but it's still called uneven age management. What GP did and Crossett Lumber Company did was uneven age management, but on a huge landscape. So they had all of this, thousands of acres. They couldn't do 100% inventory. It's impossible. They didn't have enough manpower. So what they did, they found when they wanted to cut an area, they cruised it, and let's say they had a pine stand that they were going to clip, and they usually did it by rows. We did it the whole row, the whole area, and we just started on 140, and if it needed thinning, which is 60-year-old, let's say it was 60-year-old timber out there, they would either thin it real heavy or they would cut it back to a seed tree. And that way it'd be enough open area when they get through cutting it that the seedlings would come up on its own, and they'd leave enough seed trees in case a fire or something killed them. They'd still have seed to replant it, naturally. It was a natural thing. And then if it was younger saw timber, we'd thin it, but we'd just leave it at different basal areas. And a basal area is just a measurement of how many inches of wood is on an acre, basically.
Okay.
Kind of. That's not really, but that's about the quickest way I could tell you. But it's different basal areas. Like they may want to hold it at 50 basal area or 30 basal area. Most of the time when we did it, we'd be between 50 and 80 basal area, and that's where we'd hold it. That gives it enough room to grow. None of the limbs would be touching each other when we'd leave out of there, when they get it cut. So it'd grow another 10 or 12 years. So that's the way they did. That's the way they did uneven age management. They just did it in stages different than the spearmint station. The way the spearmint station did it, they measured every tree, and then the big trees that was on the area, they would take them out first because the sawmills don't like huge stuff, especially now. You can't hardly get rid of it. But, after 24 inches in diameter, they would want to try to cut that tree out. So that was the trees that you'd get. That would be number one. Number two would be like if you had 10 trees standing right around you while you was spotting, you'd try to pick the one tree or two trees that would help all the rest of the trees grow better. Now, it may be that it's a bad disease tree that you just have to take out, or a bad forked tree that you'd have to take out, but you try to take out something that would help all the rest of the trees in there, so you take the middle tree out. That's the way I'd kind of tell people to start with. You take that middle tree out. Sort of like thinning corn or anything else, you want to leave your best stuff to grow, you know. And that's the way the experimental station did it. And that's the way we did most all. And of course, a lot of it was done by computers. By the time I left out, you know, we did it with computers, and in some of our plots, a lot of our plots, we had every tree numbered, so we knew exactly where the tree stood on the plot, because when we put a center stake on the plot, and we mapped every tree on the whole plot, and then we took diameters and heights and everything, so we knew everything that we could think about the tree, you know, whether it's got any damage, forks, all of that was noted when we would do a plot. And then when we put all that in the computer, and they would take that in Monticello and say, here's the trees you need to cut, and they'd send it back down there to us. Now, there'd always be a few trees that they would, you know, they would take the trees that had to come out, you know, and you knew it because you knew which ones it was going to be pretty much every time. Then there was always a few trees you had to take just to get it to whatever basal area or whatever volume per acre or whatever it was they was shooting for, you know. But then, so we'd do that in the field, and then they'd cut it, and then we'd go back and check after the cut. We'd measure again. CGP couldn't do all that. Just too much manpower. Just takes too much manpower to. But
that's crazy.
But we did it on their land and Deltic's land and Potlatch and everywhere else. You know, we did all those plots all over everywhere. So for different reasons.
Well, did you work around Reynolds, the Russell Reynolds?
Oh, no? Yes. I worked one fall when the experimental station was closed. They had, I guess it was the last year that they planted, you know, they were doing superior trees. I don't know if you know what a superior tree is, but, okay. Everything that they grow nowadays, when they plant trees, that's superior stock, and it's trees that over the years, and it started right here in Crossett. They picked the very best tree, the fastest growing tree out there in the woods, and there's a lot of things I could tell you about that, but just think about it, the best tree that they could find, and they marked it. Then they took that tree, they protected that tree, and they numbered it. And and last time I was up there, which was about 2 years ago, Crossett number 1, and that's still a good tree.
Yeah.
And it's still standing. But back in the 50s, in the 60s, they would climb those trees and take cuttings off of them. And they would do it by hand. They would take they pollinate one tree, crossbreed this tree with another tree, and all these trees are scattered all over Arkansas. Some of them, now it's all over the South. I mean, not from East Texas all the way to the East Coast. Loblolly. And they all numbered. Huh?
Wow. And a lot of the twins of that dude right there then, huh? Kind of.
Yes,
kind of
yes. That tree is still used, as far as I know, today that, of course, they don't go get the clippings off of that tree. They've used it all along, you know. Mm-hmm. And then they plant those trees. They cross them. Then they plant those trees in plantations, and then we'd come in and measure each one. And if like some of them, they look good, they grow fast and all that, but they all forked. So that goes out, and that tree leaves. I mean, you know, it's gone. They don't use it. So over the years, and GP was a big GP, and Weyerhaeuser was real big in that genetic cross trees. And it all really started right there at Crossett. And but mostly because it was that's an even age thing, that research went to Alexander, Louisiana, and to Mississippi. I'll think of the name of that forest down there in a minute, but down at Gulfport. That's where that research went, because they were doing even age management stuff. And so, but Crossett has always been part of it, you know. So, I mean, we didn't climb them no more. We used 22s and shot the ends of the tree limbs out, you know.
Yeah.
Which was against government regulations, but nobody knew but us. So
hey, whenever I see those old lumberjacks, you know, hauling butt up one of those trees and whacking off a piece of it up there, 60, 70 feet up in the air, man, I want to tell you, that's not where I want to be at personally.
No, I didn't ever like that. I didn't mind climbing a tree by hand. But when it came to ladders or spikes, I couldn't do the spikes, but I could do the ladders a little bit. But I was scared to death up there on them ladders. After I got in the limbs, I was okay. Or bucket trucks or something like that, I was okay with all that. But I didn't like the climb on the side of that tree. And some people, it didn't bother them a bit. And like you said, I've watched them cut the tops out of them trees. I wouldn't do it for nothing. Ain't no way.
Well, what about a fire tower? Did you ever sit in one of those dudes? Or been up in one?
I've been in a bunch of. My dad worked for the Louisiana Forestry Commission down here in Beekman.
Yeah.
And so I was around fire when I was 8 years old. We'd go with him on fires, you know. And been to the Stevenson Fire Tower and the Beekman Fire Tower a bunch of times, and I've been in that Crossroads Fire Tower, and they were in the Crossett office down here at the experimental station. There's two things in there that might interest you. One is there's a Smokey the Bear that one of our scientists carved with a chainsaw.
Wow.
Now, they have condemned that building, and they called me here a couple of weeks ago about that Smokey the Bear. It was given to me when that guy retired. And so I told them to take it to Monticello to the state office. If they want, that's where they wanted to take it, and I told them to go ahead and take it there, because you see, Don Bragg's dead. The experimental station, there's only 2 employees that I know of, and that's a secretary up there in Monticello, and I guess she's running everything. And then one guy down here that's a technician down here at Crossett. That's the only 2 people that I know of in that unit.
Wow.
And so then the state works there, you know.
Yeah.
And the reason the state works there, when I first started working there, was about 14 of us there. Don Gamble, I don't know if you know the Gambles, but, you know, one of the Gambles that got Gamble's Pharmacy. His brother was Don Gamble, or actually a cousin. I'm sorry, he was a cousin. But Don Gamble run the experimental station when it opened back up, and that's when I started working for him.
I got you.
And when he left, I took over the experimental station to, superintendent they called it, and so, and then and then everybody kind of got laid off except for me. I was down there by myself. So the state had an office in North Crossett, but they were getting kicked out of that because the water company was wanting to build out there, change things up. So we moved them. We made an agreement with them to move into the office down there with me, and that helped me out, mowing and cleaning and all that kind of stuff, and gave them offices too, so.
Yes, sir.
I don't know.
Yes, sir. That makes sense. That makes sense. Probably working on some of the same things sometimes, or related, maybe.
Yeah. The only thing about the state and the federal government, of course, the fire. That would be anything. I work with them with the fires. If they needed me to come to a fire, I'd go to a fire with them. I went to a lot of fires with them. But
one of the things that intrigued me about reading about those, the fire and fire control is the most, to me, I'm gonna be honest with you, Mike. It's interesting, particularly when they started getting the aerial stuff in it. But even more particularly was the people they called the burners. And I was trying to figure out what these people were doing, and were they mad at the company? Were they mad at? I mean, why were people starting fires so much? What do you think?
Well, I've heard people call them burners, but they just arsonists. That's what they are. Now,
I got you.
There's a lot of reasons. But I'll tell you some of the things that I know after catching some of them over the years.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is volunteer fire departments. A lot of them are members of volunteer fire departments. They'll go out and set a fire and come back to their house and say, then they'll call and say, I think there's a fire on so-and-so. And they'll run down there and get in the fire truck and be the first ones on the fire. It gives them that makes them feel like they really accomplished something,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I can see that.
Here's the problem with that. They don't realize we keep records.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever called, who was the first one on the fire, who was the last one on the fire, we keep records. How long that they stayed on that fire, everybody that's on that fire, we try to keep as close a records as possible. Every personnel that worked on that fire, whether they was in an airplane or whatever, So if their name came up, they was the first one on the fire for 6 fires in a row. The state forest officers go into their house and knock on their door.
They wouldn't have a conversation.
Yeah. And then there's always people that's mad. They mad at the company.
Yeah.
There's been a few of them caught. None of them that I know that's actually been arrested. But we knew it was them, but we couldn't pin it on them. It's hard to convict somebody of a forest fire. Basically, you have to have somebody that's got good character that saw them light the match or the cigarette lighter or whatever. They actually saw them with their eyes, and they willing to go to court. And so it's very hard to do, but there's been a few. And but the ones that mad at the company for some reason. Let's say they worked at the paper mill, and every evening for when it's dry on a certain area, like from Crossett to Fountain Hill, out 133, within a quarter mile of Highway 133 to this man's house, every evening they got a little fire somewhere. Well, it don't take long. Like I say, we got records what time these fires are. So we start putting a plane up and watching the paper mill because we know what time and we know it's them. But the fires quit when you go to their house, when the state fire officer goes to their house and knocks on their door, and the fires quit. That might be, I mean, so you know it was them even after the fact. But they know to quit now because they're fixing to go to 10 years in jail if they get caught, you know.
Yeah, it gets serious when you got an officer sitting there or somebody sitting there accusing you of it, and they're going to be trying to find you, so you better be backing out.
That's right.
Unless you're an arsonist and you can't help yourself. Those are those people that stop it.
Now, that's the last one. That's the last one I'll tell you about. Now, here's why most of them do it. It's a sexual thing.
I believe it.
It is. Yeah. It is. The two that I was involved with a little bit, that the last time when we caught him, we pinned him. We had him. The airplane was watching for a certain vehicle. We already had it kind of figured out. Yeah. And I happened to be in the area, so I went in one way and the other guy went in the other way. When I come up on him, he was outside pleasuring himself.
That doesn't surprise me.
Right.
With studying crime, that makes sense, actually. Yes.
And that was a sickening thing. Now, he went to jail. That particular guy went to jail. The other one that I was involved with, then I didn't see it or anything, but it was the same thing. You know, every time they had DNA and everything else from napkins and everything else, but they just couldn't pin it on him. They just couldn't pin it on him. And that was in Drew County. But the one that I was involved in was up in north side of Ashley County. But just you know, some kind of, he's kind of freaky, you know, sexual. Don't even make sense, but.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of psychological stuff that makes sense to me. But I'm going to tell you this, that I remember I've only climbed that one. You mentioned that Crossroads one. I climbed it with Chester Ray Porter with Boy Scouts back in, like, I don't know, 1980, 1981, something like that. It was a long time ago. 79 maybe, I don't know. But that was some weird stuff. We went up there, and, of course, I remember reading about it recently. Got on my mind because I think they were put in like 31, 37, sometimes around paper mill time, somewhere around there, maybe a little bit before. But it was during Russell Reynolds' sojourn. But
that's when about in the 30s when they started all that. Now the first fire tires was in pine trees. That's what I was going to tell you about. There's a section of a fire tire inside that office. I don't know what they've done with it. I've been saying I was going to go up there and see, but there's a section of the fire tire. They climb those on them real dry, windy days. They would climb those trees that got spikes in them, and they were taller than anything else, usually on a ridge or somewhere. And the one that's up in the office, I actually went and got. It was over on the Berlin Road. We carried a tractor over there and went in the woods and picked this piece. We found out that they had cut it. It was lightning struck. It dead, and we got a section of it that was way up in the tree, you know. And we made a planter out of it. Is what we did. We made a planter and set it on a piece of plywood where we could put it on the carpet in there. But I never climbed one of them now. I saw a couple of them the ones I saw was in North Arkansas. They were still alive, but I never saw that one. I knew it was one over there, but I didn't know it. I didn't know exactly where it was. But after they didn't want people to know about where they were, to tell you the truth.
What kind of contraption was it? Is there anything at the top of the tree to stand in, or are they just climbing the top of the tree?
No. You just climb up in there, and usually the forester or the assistant forester would climb up there, and all he'd take a compass. And sometimes they wouldn't do that, but because they knew where they was at, and they'd climb up there, see if they could see where the smoke was coming from. And if they could see, they'd take that compass reading. They knew where the tree was, and they'd take a compass reading and guess how many miles it was from that tree. And then they'd have a way of looking, Now, if they could see the source of that smoke from two directions, they'd find the fire real quick. That's what fire tires did. Those fire tires had a big compass on the table, and it's like shooting a rifle. You just put the sights in it, and then you guessed how many miles it was over there. And then the other fire tire could see it, and he shot a compass line. Well, he could guess if he wanted to, but with those two compass lines meet from two known areas, that's where the fire's at. You just go there and put the fire out. It's pretty simple.
Did you know of any fire towers that were not on the main drag? Like the ones that I know of are like down there, like Beekman and Crossett and Drew County up there. They're on Highway 82, 425, whatever it is up there. But were there ones out in the middle of nowhere as well, or were they pretty just close to places? Or
no, they were always in this country, in this area. They were always close to a road. It might not be real close to a real state highway or something, but it wouldn't be very far off a state highway. And one of the reasons was, like Beekman Tower and Stevenson Tower, I knew more about those towers than I did anything else, but there was a telephone in both of those towers, and Robert Stevenson's house, which he lived down close to Stevenson, down by the railroad tram, he had a telephone in his house that connected those two towers. And so they could talk on those telephones, old ringer type telephones. I've talked on those telephones. You just ring it up, and that telephone line went from Stevenson all the way across through the woods, through Beekman, all the way over yonder to the tower over there at Beekman on the Hamburg Road, on the Hamburg Crossett Hamburg Road. I mean the Hamburg Bastrop Road, 425, crossed it. And we, of course, us kids, we'd get up there and ring, call them, talk to them, So they'd let us because our daddies worked for the forestry, So.
Sure, for sure. But now, let's see, what other kind of things, it sounds to me like fire is a big part of what was being done in that, and, your scouting and stuff. What other kinds of things did you do? You said you were a woodsman. What did a week look like for you whenever you were doing your job? I guess is a good way to put it.
All right, we would spot timber. We'd cruise timber, and what that means is we'd take a compass and go so many paces and go across the half a mile down through the woods, and then we'd take in plots every so many feet, and they'd count the trees and go to another one, and then come back. And usually that was a half a mile strips. That's what we'd do, half a mile. We'd go half a mile away from the road and come back, because that worked best. But sometimes you'd leave the truck and not get back to the truck until 5 o'clock in the evening. It's just according to how, like down in the swamp down there, I've cruised some down there with George Staggs. I don't know if you know him or not, but he used to work for GP. I've cruised down there with him. When we left, we'd have to go down the river in a boat and then go across. We went across the river, and we was cruising all that for Felton's. All what we was doing. They fixing to sell it. So we'd cruise down there all day long, and then get back to the boat just in time to. We'd just have enough time to get in the boat and get to the bridge up there at the old river over the beer joint up there, just in time to load the boat up before it got dark. And we did that for like 3 or 4 weeks, up and down that river. That was some rough days there. So,
yeah.
And you just had to take your lunch with you, and you didn't have nothing in your pockets because you sweat all day long. You wading creeks and sloughs, and and no landlines. You just guessing. You had to keep up with where you was at and mark it and all that stuff. Yeah, we messed up over there some.
I bet you did, because like you said, there wasn't no little GPS stuff you was carrying around with you there.
No, that was all hand compasses and walking. You had to be a good compass person, and you had to know how many feet you stepped. And it's different in the pine woods than down there in the swamp too, because you can walk better in the swamp. Back then you really could, because it was nothing really there but a few sticks on the ground and weeds. It was challenging. It was fun to me though. That's what I liked.
Yeah, you just out there kind of roaming. You can, you're not having to deal with a lot of people probably. But let me ask you this: what about extraordinarily large trees that you may have happened upon? What are some, in terms of pine? I know there's probably some other things out there, but have you seen any of those freakishly large pines in this area, or no?
Oh yeah, the marsh pine over there. I've climbed that tree.
Really?
I put a fire out in the top of that tree one time.
Wow.
Yeah, they lightning struck it, and the fire department couldn't get up it. And one of the guys said, "I know somebody to climb it." So they just got on the radio, and I drove over there. And I didn't like climbing up their ladder that they had up there, but once I got up in the trees, I was fine. But those limbs were so big. It was hard for me to climb because the limbs were so big. I couldn't get. But I took my boots off. I could climb like a monkey then, and I'd take my boots off. Of course I was young. And then I had a rope, and I pulled a water hose up there. They had a water hose hooked. The fire department had it hooked up somehow or another, and I just took and squirted it out. Stayed up there until I knew it was out, and then down the tree I went. But that's the biggest loblolly tree that's in the state. Right across the road, just back toward Hamburg, and I don't know whether this tree's still there. That tree's gone, by the way. Right up the road, cross on the other side, there's a shortleaf tree over there. It was found in the last years I was working for the spearmill station. That was the biggest shortleaf in the state. I helped measure it. Don Bragg, it was called the Bragg pine because, and I don't know whether it's still there or not, because there's been 2 or 3 storms went through there, and I don't have no idea. I hadn't heard anybody say about that shortleaf that was in there. And then there was one up in the Lost 40. Have you ever heard of the Lost 40?
No, sir.
Okay, it's more than 40 acres actually, but it's on the Saline River bottom, up north of Warren, and it's owned by Potlatch, and they just never touched that area. As far as I know, they still had never cut it. But there was a big loblolly tree up there too, and if you go into the forestry building up there in UAM, they got a section cut out of that tree. That's when I found it. Went to it. I knew it was there, but I'd never went to it. But I went up there to help them figure out how they was going to get that section of that tree out of those woods without busting it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I went up to help them do that, and that's when I saw it. And that they got that thing kind of as a display, you know. I don't remember how many years this year. I don't know, 600 years old. I don't remember how old it was. It's real old. And they got it pinned, you know. Here's so and so's birthday, and you know this happened, and they got these little pins on it. Or that's when it was when I was there. So.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how old it was? I think that they said the Morris pine. I think it was destroyed in 2020, but it was probably created somewhere around 1700, somewhere around there. Would you?
Yeah,
remember?
and see that we don't know. I went over there one time. We drilled it, but we couldn't find a place that we could actually drill it. We carried a big bore because it's easier to get out of a hollow tree when it was hollow. And we couldn't drill but about 6 inches deep, and then we'd hit a spot that bit. You got to have enough wood to pull it through, you know, even though you're pushing on it, and it has to. It don't grab the rotten spot, especially a hollow. It ain't gonna go nowhere in a hollow, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we never could find, but that thing was so. Even what the cores we brought out from there, they were so tight that we couldn't even count them in the woods. We had to bring them back and put them under a microscope to count them. That's how tight they were. And I don't even remember what we guessed at, but it was way up there, like 500 years old or something, and that was wild guess, you know.
Oh yeah.
But the tree in the Lost 40 up there at Warren, it was pretty solid because all the trees in that area was still there, the same age, see. So it was more solid wood. It was pethy, or it wasn't rotten, but it was pethy, soft.
Yeah.
But you could drill it, and it had been drilled before. Now, way those trees, it takes a 40-inch bit. You got to go halfway in the tree, you know. It takes a long bit. It's a major job. Sometimes I couldn't. I don't weigh much. I weigh I weigh 180 now, but back when I was working, I weighed about 150. I couldn't turn some of them things. I just didn't have enough butt, you know, to turn it.
Yeah.
Your skill, especially when you're talking about hardwoods, I couldn't do some of them. A lot of them I couldn't turn. I could start them. I could get them in there maybe 5 inches, but then it got so tight. I mean, we broke a bunch of those bits in trees because they were so tight. So it's so hard. You don't realize how much pressure's in them trees. I didn't know it for years. But I was with the scientists. We was boring some oak trees. And we was boring them at about 5 foot. That's where we was right in our face, you know. And he bored into a white oak tree. And when he got in and I was standing right there with him, right there beside him. And when that bore went in about 2 inches, it was like a 22 went off. Pew! And it went in his eyes. It blowed the core out. I don't know if you ever seen the cores or not, but it popped him on the nose, or right below the nose, that core, and it made a big bruise spot. But that juices of that tree went in his eyes. Of course, he didn't have no safety glasses on. We didn't wear them, you know. Yeah. And immediately he said, "I'm blind." I said, "What?" And he said, "I can't see." So I had some water, a couple of bottles of water, and he rinsed his eyes out. We got him out of the woods, and of course, his house was in Monticello, and it was another guy that he went to Monticello Hospital, and they flushed his eyes, but he ended up going to Little Rock the next day, and they flushed his eyes again, and they found some kind of, I don't know what it was, a virus, or I don't know what it was actually called, but he had to take some special medicine. It took him like 3 months for him to get his eyesight back. And they said if he hadn't have jumped right on it and got his eyes flushed, he would have probably lost his sight. It was just so much pressure in that tree, and it was just a normal tree to us, you know, something we just did all the time. But it just bloated out.
I read this book. This is really a couple of years ago, and it kind of got my mind turned back to forestry. And this may blow your mind, but it was about this German, speaking of German, this German forester. And he has a book called Secret Life of Trees. But he suggested that, like, in natural growth forests, not forests where there's these superior trees, like you're not planted forests, you know, you're just talking about natural growth forests that he was talking about over there. There'd be trees that were family of trees, and they were connected at the roots, connected with fungi, and they would communicate. And they would, like, if another kind of tree came in that they didn't get along with, they would send bad chemicals to it and kill it. Yeah. I mean, it was all kinds of cool stuff. Those trees communicated, and if one tree needed something, the rest of the trees would send him whatever nutrient that needed. You know, it was really wild. I was like, that sounds like, you know, they're, I mean, they're alive, and they're just trading resources, you know. But it was really weird to think about that. What do you think about it, though?
Well, I know that a lot of that's true, and we did some experiments with that. Not much, but some. I had a scientist that he got into that quite a bit. The problem is trying to figure out how those roots, of course, around here is just so many pine trees, so many trees. In some places, you don't have but just scattered trees, and they've been there for, say, 50 years, and they've been scattered. You can put some dye in this tree, and it'll show up in that tree over there. Around here, it's hard because if you put dye in this tree, it's so many roots attached to all the different trees. By the time it gets to all of those trees, there's not enough dye for you to figure it out.
Oh,
you see what I'm saying? But here's what we did. We went around after ice storms, and where there was several trees close to a tree that, say, broke off, we would measure that stump, that broke off tree. And we didn't want nobody cut in there. You know, it had to be somebody, we'd flag it off and everything. We'd measure that dead stump. There's not a green limb on it nowhere. Made sure no green limbs.
Yeah.
We've proven that we was trying to prove that the roots were connected. And one of the trees that we did is on the road where I turn in to come to work, come to my house. That it was I think it was like 8-inch diameter. It's dead now because the big tree right beside it is dead. But that tree stayed alive the whole time, and it actually grew like 0.3 of an inch in like 10 years. Wow. Which most trees around here, they're going to grow 3 or 4 tenths every year, you know. But we knew it was attached because it's still green. Until that big tree got struck by lightning, it was still green. And we did that all over from here all the way to Pine Bluff to the Mississippi Delta. I mean, several counties around here. After these ice storms, we'd go and find these things. And we know they was connected. We just don't know which trees it's connected to. You know, it's just, it costs so much money to inject dye into those roots and special equipment, and usually they want you to use radioactive stuff so that you can follow it. You know, just like a CT scan when you go to the doctor, that's the kind of thing that you'd have to prove it. So, and we didn't have that kind of money to do it, you know. So
that is voluminously interesting, and you know, and like you said, that you start thinking about it, you know, like, you know, the grafting and stuff. I guess that's what they're doing with that. Those pieces.
It's natural grafting. Yeah,
and
there's several trees, and there was one tree we had on the list down here in Schmanny Hall Park. It's on the buy. I knew it since a kid. It's a forked red oak tree, and it's got a limb from one fork to the other fork, and it's no green leaves on that. It's just a big, like 10-inch diameter limb from one fork to the other fork, right straight across. And and we went down there and we took pictures of it, and of course we didn't measure it because we had to climb up that tree, but they put it on their list, and we watched it for 15 years. You know, go down there every year and look at it. So, and we did that all over everywhere. They limbs graft. Sometimes you have like a sweet gum tree and a red oak, and they'll graft together. Now, they still different species, but you can't really tell them apart down at where they graft together at. It's kind of hard. And I've seen I've seen a few where somebody took a chainsaw and they cut them off, cut the stump part off of one of them, and it's enough left there for a limb at least. And it may be an elm tree, but the oak tree is what's keeping it alive. It's an oak tree. Just looking at it, it looks like an oak tree with an elm limb is what you'd think it'd be, but it's actually a natural graft. That's what it is. So,
you do see, like, it's usually some kind of a horrible situation, seem like, that causes it, but, you know, in natural realities. But now with you know, you mentioned that about those trees a little bit ago about the age, but it comes to mind. There's, you know, it doesn't surprise me. I think there are some trees that are 3,000 to 5,000 years old. But here's the direction I was going to throw at you. And this is some stuff that I learned the other day as well, and I didn't ever really know. You know, you're talking about a tree growing, and I never really thought about what that meant. You know, you hear environmental people saying, well, we got too much carbon in there, which is stuff that's floating around in the air. And from what I understand, how trees grow is basically they're breathing in and collecting all the stuff that's in the air and using that to make their body. Is that kind of how it's doing, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, it's nutrients. The trees is taking nutrients out of the air, and they're taking nutrients out of the soil. And it's making wood fiber. And the trees only grow in two directions. They grow up and they grow out. And that's on the, well, of course they got roots that grows down too, but I mean, like a longleaf tree, a longleaf pine down in South Louisiana, it grows the roots first. I mean, it can grow roots for 50 years, and it's nothing but pine needles sticking out of the ground. It's really weird. And then it may be those pine needles, that clump of pine needles may be 10 inches in diameter, but it won't be 6 inches tall. And then a fire comes across there, you have to burn it. A fire goes across it, then it'll shoot up a tree. And it looks just like a loblolly pine tree when it starts growing like that. we planted some in the yard up there at the experimental station, and when they stayed in that grass, they call it the grass stage. They stayed in that grass stage for about 3 years. So to get them to grow, we went out there and piled some pine straw on them and set them on fire, and it looked like it killed them. Next spring, they came out and started growing up and started looked like a pine tree. And they right there on that the south driveway. When you turn in there, they on the right hand side, they're in that yard right there close to the highway. It's funny how all them trees does all that kind of stuff, you know.
You know,
Stuff that I never knew that happened, you know.
well, you know, you're talking about that burning, and that got me to thinking about that Chappy Chapman. You know, he was, from what I read, I don't know how much you know about him or if I'm right or not, but I seem like I remember reading where he was a proponent of burning. You know, like the Native Americans would go in and burn, and, you know, what is your thoughts on the burning, the control burning?
Control burning, I love it. GP did a lot of control burning when I worked with them, and I learned a lot about that. I did a lot of it with the experimental station, but the experimental station, see, Reynolds didn't believe in it. Reynolds was one of the old timers that they had to protect what they had from fire, and I understand that. And I've sat down and talked. Of course, he was retired, but he came back when they opened back up and gave us schools. He taught us how to spot timber like they did. What all the experimental station, when we opened up an old experiment that they had, he would come down and tell us how they did it and all that, you know. He helped us on that. So I learned a lot, but he was completely against fire. He you know, he understood why we used it, why the company used it, but in uneven age management, you want thousands of 1-year-old pine seedlings on your lot, or, you know, your 40-acre lot. You want thousands of them just walking on them, just like grass. And then as it goes up, the diameter of the tree, you want small number of large trees. And that's how you keep that uneven age. They called it a J-shaped, a reverse J-shaped curve of the diameter of the trees is what they called it. And it keeps, that way you always got trees growing there, you know. You want a lot of little trees because you're going to tear up trees when you go in there to cut. And a fire kills that real easy. Kills loblolly every time. Now, shortleaf, sometimes you can burn a shortleaf and kill it, but it'll sprout back. But loblolly will not sprout back. It won't. So he was completely against burning. But it works good for controlling the brush, you know, and getting the ground ready for seed, for pine seed. He agreed with all of that, but he just said, you really don't need it, you know. So,
I remember being young and watching GP do it. I remember those days. You know, it was, you know, well, they're burning over there, you know, because you could see the smoke for 100 miles, you know, or whatever.
Oh yeah. When the time got right, we burned a lot of territory, you know. So.
Well, I was reading recently they were talking about getting rid of ticks and rodents and all, snakes and all kinds of stuff. But anyway.
Well, yeah, used to, the old timers, they did it to keep the grass growing so their cows could get fat, you know. And keep ticks down, keep the snakes out, all kinds of stuff like that. So.
Well, I tell you what, Mike, I have immensely, I know I've been about an hour and a half. I drove you crazy. You're thinking, damn, dude, give me a break here. But I do appreciate you talking to me like this. That's intense, but I love it, man. This is what I needed. Just to hear you talk about it, and you gave me a couple of things I got to go Google. I got to go get this reverse J shape thing. I got to understand that a little bit better. But yeah. This is interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. I appreciate you, man.
Oh yeah, anytime.
Yeah, well, we got to do this as a show, though. I think as an interview thing. What do you think?
I ain't too much on that, but you know, I'm not real thrilled about that. But I mean, I'd do it, I guess, but I don't really like that. So I'd rather just talk to you.
It would be just like you're doing now, but I'm going to tell you this though, it doesn't make a difference to me. I don't care. I've enjoyed speaking with you, and like I said, to talking with someone that was involved in it, especially to the level that you were, and just knowing it, and you know, and intellectual too. Because a lot of people you come across, they would, you know, some of that stuff there, you know, the trees living. They would probably think that was kind of weird, but I thought it was weird too. But I was like, well, I guess they are living, you know, and it's so weird because the thing to me is that as a human being, I can get up and move around, and I think I'm free and living. But a tree, it's kind of stuck, you know, it can't be moving around.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But, all right, Mike, I appreciate you, sir. Be blessed. Thank you for your time today.
Oh yeah. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye.